we're in Ireland together. My brother and my wife and his wife, and we were visiting my cousin, and we went to visit have a tour of the Bushmills distillery, which was only a short distance away from my cousin's house. So we go into the place, and that's when Sam, like I say, he was all hunched up, and he says, I don't want to go through the tour. You go through the tour. I'm going to go to the hospitality area, right? So I says, well, I'll just find out where it's at, and I'll go with you. So I went with him and left him there, and I'll tell you what, you go on a tour, and it's about an hour's tour. So we come back, and here's my brother Sam behind the bar. He's now taking the place of the bartender. The bartender's sitting at the chair on the stool, and Sam says, now come on and meet this guy. I said, oh yeah, of course. This is Jimmy. Jimmy, he says, you know who Jimmy is? Jimmy's the son of the grocer who lived up here in such and such a little town that supplied our destroyer when we were off the coast. And he said, I would drive the landing barges and we'd load up with supplies. And he was a grocer, and this young Jimmy at the time was the grocer's son. And he remembered helping his dad load these big Navy LDDs. Was it?
LSDs.
LSDs. Our family started with my father being born in Ireland in 1893. And he met my mother, and at a young age, they eloped to Canada, much to the chagrin of my great-grandfather, or my grandfather, I guess. And they came to Canada in 1912, and then had 3 children. My older brother, Bob, then Andy, they were 364 days apart. And then my sister, Jean. And then the First World War came, and my dad joined the Canadian Army in 1914 and off to war. Well, my mother, being alone in Canada, figured the best spot for her was back in Ireland. So she went back to Ireland with the 3 children. And my dad was in the war from 1914 to 18, and he was involved in many of the battles, which we will discuss, no doubt. And then got back from the war, and they had actually 8 more children. My mother, they had 11 children altogether. 2 of the children died shortly after birth, within a few months. And then, unfortunately, when my younger brother was killed by a car when he was 4 in 1940, actually. So I ended up being the youngest of the family of 8. So I'm the last surviving brother, and I have 2 surviving sisters. So we're very honored and happy to be able to relate a few of the stories about my father and my 3 brothers, all of whom are in the service. Sam, the youngest, was the most active and probably had more adventures than anybody, and he was in the Navy. And then my brother Bob, the eldest, was in the Essex Scottish. Unfortunately got wounded and almost lost his leg in training, which my dad really never forgave him for. He says, what are you doing with an incendiary bomb in your pocket? It's not supposed to be there. And then my brother Andy was in the Air Force, but he had 3 children, so he didn't get sent over. He was an instructor, and one of the reasons he was an instructor is because he got airsick. And he was a navigator, and navigators don't do well when they're airsick. So he ended up being a trainer in the Air Force for the last 2 years of the war. So that is a brief story about the relatives that were in the war. I was fortunate enough to be young enough not to be involved in the active service, but it was in the genes, I guess. So I joined the Navy Reserves, and because I played the trumpet, I was in the band, and I had a great 5 years of playing in the band, and I can tell you my seat time, it takes about 2 seconds. I was out on a destroyer once in Nanaimo. We went out for a half an hour and came back, and that was my sea time for 5 years in the Navy. So it was but one of the good parts about being in the that particular band at that time, and this was in the late 40s and early 50s, was that many of the members were from active service. They were active in the Navy, and some of them from the Army, actually, that smartened up and went into the Navy. And I had some great stories that they related to me as a youngster, which probably most of them were true. But anyway, it was quite a very good experience being involved with that organization, and it was good for me too.